Welcome to Brainish English Stories.
Boulogne-sur-Mer, January 22nd. Our reporter writes, "A terrible accident has made the people of our fishing town very scared. They have already had a lot of hard times in the last 2 years. The fishing boat, led by Captain Javel, crashed on the rocks near the harbor when it tried to come back. Even though the lifeboat tried to help, and people on the shore sent ropes to save them, for sailors and a young cabin boy were lost. The bad weather is still going on. More accidents are expected. Who is Captain Javel? Is he the brother of the man with one arm? If the man who was thrown around in the waves and is now dead under his broken boat is the one I am thinking of, then he was part of another sad event 18 years ago. This event was sad and simple, just like many other terrible things that happen at sea. Javel, the older brother, was in charge of a trawling boat. The trawling boat is the best kind of fishing boat. It is very strong and not afraid of any weather. It has a round bottom and moves up and down on the waves like a cork. It always stays on top of the water, even when the strong, salty winds of the English Channel hit it. The boat moves through the sea without stopping. Its big sail is full of wind, and it pulls a large net that drags along the bottom of the ocean, catching all the animals hiding in the rocks, the flat fish stuck to the sand, the heavy crabs with their claws, and the lobsters with their long whiskers. When the wind is strong and the sea is rough, the boat starts to fish. The net is tied to a big log of wood with iron on it. It is lowered into the water with 2 ropes, one at the front and one at the back of the boat. The wind and the tide help the boat pull the net through the water, cleaning out the bottom of the sea and taking everything that lives there. Javel had his younger brother, 4 sailors, and a cabin boy on the boat with him. They left Boulogne on a beautiful day to go fishing. But soon the wind got stronger, and a big storm forced the boat to go to the shore. They reached the English coast, but the high waves hit the rocks and crashed on the beach. It was too dangerous to go into the harbor, and the entrance was full of foam and noise. The boat went back out to sea, moving up and down on the waves, shaking and getting wet. The strong water hit the boat, but it kept going. This boat was used to this kind of wild weather, which sometimes made it go between the 2 countries without being able to stop at either one. Finally, the storm became calmer when they were in the middle of the sea. Even though the sea was still rough, the captain told them to throw the fishing net into the water. So, the net was lowered into the water, and 2 men at the front of the boat and 2 at the back started to let out the ropes that held it. The net reached the bottom, but a big wave hit the boat, making it tip to the side. Javel, the younger brother, was at the front of the boat, guiding the net, but he lost his balance, and his arm got caught in the rope. The rope had slipped from the pulley for a moment because of the wave. He tried very hard to lift the rope with his other hand, but the net was already in the water, and the tight rope wouldn't move. The man screamed in pain. Everyone ran to help him. His brother left the steering wheel. They all grabbed the rope, trying to free his arm that was being hurt by the tight rope. But it was no use. "We need to cut the rope," said one of the sailors. He took a big knife out of his pocket. With just 2 cuts, he could save young Javel's arm. But if they cut the rope, the net would be lost. The net was worth a lot of money, 1,500 francs, and it belonged to Javel, the older brother, who cared very much about his things. "No, don't cut it, wait. I will steer the boat," he shouted, very worried. He ran to the wheel and turned the rudder. But the boat did not move much because the net was making it slow down. The wind and the strong tide were also pushing against the boat. Javel, the younger brother, had fallen to his knees. His teeth were clenched in pain, and his eyes looked wild. He didn't say a word. His brother returned to him, afraid that the sailor might use the knife. "Wait, wait," he said. "We will drop the anchor." They dropped the anchor and started to turn the winch to loosen the ropes holding the net. After some time, they finally freed his trapped arm, which was now bloody inside his woolen shirt. Young Javel seemed confused, as if he didn't understand what had happened. They took off his shirt, and it was a horrible sight. His arm was a mess of flesh, with blood pouring out like water from a pump. The young man looked at his arm and whispered, "It's ruined." Then, as blood was pooling on the deck of the boat, one of the sailors shouted, "He's going to bleed to death. We need to tie up the vein." So, they took a thick, brown rope, sticky with tar, and wrapped it around his arm above the wound. They pulled it tight with all their strength. Slowly, the blood started to stop, and finally, it stopped bleeding completely. Young Javel stood up, his arm hanging at his side. He held it with his other hand, lifted it, turned it over, and shook it. His arm was crushed. The bones were broken, and only the muscles were keeping it together. He looked at it sadly, thinking about what had happened. Then he sat down on a folded sail. His friends told him to keep wetting the arm so it wouldn't get worse. They put a bucket of water beside him, and every few minutes, he took a glass, filled it with water, and poured it over his injured arm, letting the clear water flow over the wound. "You would be better in the cabin," his brother said. So he went down to the cabin, but he came back up an hour later. He didn't want to be alone, and he liked the fresh air more. He sat down again on his sail and kept wetting his arm. They caught a lot of fish. The flat fish, with their white bellies, lay next to him, shaking as they died. He looked at them while he continued to pour water over his hurt arm. As they were about to go back to Boulogne, the wind picked up again. The small boat started bouncing and shaking wildly, making the poor hurt man suffer even more. Night came, and the sea stayed rough until the next morning. When the sun came up, they could see the English coast again. But since the weather had calmed down a bit, they turned back toward the French coast, sailing in a zigzag as they went. Later that evening, Javel, the younger brother, called his friends and showed them some black spots on his injured arm. These black marks were a terrible sign that the lower part of his arm was dying. The sailors looked at it and shared their thoughts. "That might be the Black Death," said one of them. "He should put salt water on it," said another. So they brought some salt water and poured it on his wound. Javel turned pale, clenched his teeth, and twisted in pain, but he didn't scream. Then, when the pain lessened, he said to his brother, "Give me your knife." His brother gave it to him. "Hold my arm straight and pull it," he told them. They did as he asked. Then Javel started cutting off his own arm. He cut slowly and carefully, using the knife to slice through all the tendons with its sharp blade. Soon all that was left was a stump. He let out a deep breath and said, "It had to be done. The arm was ruined." He looked relieved and started pouring water over the stump that remained of his arm. The sea was still rough, so they couldn't reach the shore. When the next day came, Javel, the younger brother, took the part of his arm that he had cut off and looked at it for a long time. The arm had already started to rot. His friends also looked at it. They passed it around, touching it, turning it over, and even smelling it. "You must throw that into the sea right away," said his brother. But Javel, the younger brother, got upset. No, I don't want to. It's mine, isn't it? It's my arm." He then took it and placed it between his feet. "It will rot anyway," said the older brother. Then the injured man had an idea. To keep fish fresh when they were at sea for a long time, they would pack it in salt inside barrels. He asked, "Why can't I put my arm in salt too?" "That's a good idea," the others agreed. So they emptied one of the barrels, which was full of fish they had caught in the past few days. They put the arm at the very bottom of the barrel. Then they covered it with salt and put the fish back in one by one. One of the sailors made a joke. "I hope we don't sell it by mistake." Everyone laughed except the two Javel brothers. The wind was still strong. They sailed near Boulogne until the next morning at 10 o'clock. Young Javel kept cleaning his wound. Sometimes he got up and walked from one end of the boat to the other. His brother, steering the boat, watched him and shook his head sadly. At last they reached the harbor. The doctor looked at the wound and said it was in good shape. He cleaned it and told Javel to rest. But Javel didn't want to rest until he got his arm back. He went straight to the dock to find the barrel, which he had marked with a cross. They emptied the barrel in front of him, and Javel grabbed his arm. It had been well preserved in the salt, but it was smaller and fresh-looking. He wrapped it in a towel he had brought with him and took it home. His wife and children looked at the arm for a long time. They touched the fingers and cleaned the salt that was stuck under the nails. Then they called a carpenter to make a small coffin for the arm. The next day, the entire crew of the fishing boat attended the funeral for the arm. The two Javel brothers walked together, leading the group. The church beadle carried the arm under his arm. Javel, the younger brother, gave up working at sea. He found a small job at the dock. Whenever he told people about his accident, he would say quietly, "If my brother had just cut the net, I would still have my arm for sure." But he only cared about his money.